So when we talk about having to find a skilled nursing facility for a loved one, whether it's for short-term or long-term care, it can be very overwhelming. There's lots to learn and know. Short-term care really refers to an individual that's coming in for rehab and able to go back into the community. Someone that is coming in and not able to safely go back home or into the community, they typically would be the patient that lives in the skilled nursing facility full time. And in terms of payment for those types of services, when we talk about short-term care, Medicare will pay 100% for the first 20 days and 80% thereafter. Many people are under the assumption that they are entitled to 100 days, and that is actually not the case. There's a lot of parameters that go into determining whether or not an individual gets the full 100 days. If an individual has a commercial plan, or maybe they have a managed Medicare plan, those insurance companies will determine how many days the individual is entitled to. So perhaps patient comes in and they're authorized for 5 days, and it's unrealistic to think that after 5 days that individual is well enough to go home. The rehab team or the nursing team at that facility will send in documentation requesting additional time, and it will be entirely up to the insurance company as to whether or not they are going to approve that. In terms of long-term care, there are really only 4 ways to pay for long-term care. The first would be Medicaid. The second would be a private pay. The third would be a long-term care insurance policy. And the fourth would be veterans benefits. Medicare does not reimburse for long-term care. When an individual is scheduled to go in for rehabilitation, many people want to know in advance, how many hours of therapy will my loved one receive? And the answer to that is there's no way to know in advance. When a patient is admitted to a skilled nursing facility, the rehab team will come up, they'll do an evaluation, perhaps they'll do some bedside exercises with them, and then it really will depend on the individual's pain level, what they're able to do in terms of standing and sitting on their own. Usually within 24 hours, the rehab team will do an evaluation, and they can absolutely provide the family with feedback on what days and what times they will be in therapy. If you have the opportunity to tour a facility prior to admission, you want to ask questions. First of all, you want to know what the visiting hours are. You want to know the nurse to patient ratio. That would be very important. Obviously, days are going to be very well staffed. You'll have smaller staffing in the evening, and night shifts are typically not staffed as heavily. The other question you want to ask is how many people are in a room, what my loved one's schedule will be in terms of physical, speech, or occupational therapy. You want to know if there's a social worker and who that individual is. The social worker should really be your conduit to anything that you need to know. Also, who the director of nursing is. Those are probably the most important questions right up front. It is very important when we choose a skilled nursing facility to know what the insurance is going to cover and what they're not going to cover. If an individual is in the hospital and they have a managed Medicare plan or a commercial plan where authorization needs to be given prior to admission to the skilled nursing facility, that is something that the hospital typically does, and the social worker at the hospital should be in touch with the family to say, you're approved for X amount of days, it's covered at 100%, perhaps it's covered at 50%, and your copay will be XYZ. That is very, very important. The last thing you want to do is get a surprise bill at the end. So, and also, in addition to that, we really have to take responsibility on our own to know what our benefits are. You have an insurance card, call the number on the card. Ask them to explain what the benefit is for you, what the out-of-pocket expense is. Do you have a maximum amount of days that you're entitled to? Also, the social worker at the skilled nursing facility should be able to clarify, as will the admissions director in a skilled nursing facility. They can go over all of that with you. In the event of an emergency and a patient who is in a skilled nursing facility has to be transported to the hospital, by law, they have to go to the closest hospital, closest to the skilled nursing facility. So you want to be able to know what that hospital is or where that hospital is. If it is not a 911 call, you can certainly request that they go to a hospital that your loved one is familiar with, their physicians are affiliated with. But please understand, in the case of an emergency, by law, they're going to go to the closest hospital to that nursing home. So once a loved one is admitted to a skilled nursing facility, the admissions office is going to call the next of kin. If the patient is not well enough to sign their own paperwork, they will contact the next of kin to come in and sign some paperwork. Many people are really very reluctant to do so because people are under the impression that if they sign, they are financially responsible for whatever the insurance company doesn't pay. So let me clarify that for you. If your husband or wife is in the skilled nursing facility, you will sign the paperwork and you will be held responsible. If you're a daughter, a son, a cousin, if you're divorced, if you're not a spouse, by law, they cannot hold you responsible for any of those details. It is in writing, and I'm sure the admissions office can supply that to you. What they will ask you to do is, in the event they need additional information from the outside, perhaps from a bank or financial planner, they will ask you to help them obtain those documents. Obviously, the patient is not going to be able to leave the facility to do that themselves, but you cannot, unless you're a spouse, you absolutely cannot be held responsible for anything financial. I want to thank you for spending this time with me here at Feldman, Kramer Monaco. We are one of the largest law firms in New York, and our estate planning and elder care division is here to help you. We will answer any questions you have. We are happy to give you a free consult. Please visit our website at fkmlaw.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and you take care and be safe out there.